There are plenty of parts of the EU that need fixing. These faults stand in the way of it being effective and strong. But unlike what populists say, the solution is not to demolish it all. The EU brought decades of peace and prosperity, and nowadays countries need the EU to face the great challenges of our time. But the EU in its current form doesn't work well. It was built for the 20th century and now needs to be brought to the 21st. Welcome to Ciceroni. We teamed up with Reinier van Lanschot, candidate for the European elections for a political party seeking to reform the EU, to discuss how to fix the EU. In part 1, we proposed the needed reforms to European Parliament, its elections and its parties. Now, over to you, Reinier, for part 2.
In this second part, we look at how to reform the other major institutions of the EU and add another one. Because to face the challenges of our time, we need an EU that is strong and effective. After having tackled the Parliament in the last video, it is time to move on to the executive branch. Number 4. European government. To make the EU a proper parliamentary democracy, there is one major change that needs to be made to the executive. At the moment, the Commission, headed by 27 commissioners, one for each country, is the de facto government of the EU. But the European Parliament has little to no influence on who sits there. Parliament does officially approve the President and the rest of the commissioners, but the way the candidates are put forward can be extremely shady. We need a proper European government that Parliament appoints, controls and can dismiss. And while we're at it, we can make it more effective, efficient and less complex by lowering the number of commissioners. Now there needs to be one per country. This might seem nice and fair, but it's rather strange if you think about it. In national governments, the number of ministers is based on a logical division of policy areas. What would you think if the division on the national level was based on some random high number and the policy areas were then divided among these ministers? So, let's get rid of this too large group of commissioners and create a true European government with a useful number of ministers based on the main policy areas of the EU and a prime minister to lead them. Number 5. European Senate. After having tackled the Parliament and the Commission, we look towards the European Council. The European Council consists of the heads of government or heads of state and takes major strategic and crisis-solving decisions. Now, you might expect transparency on how a decision was taken when it comes to really big strategic decisions that affect hundreds of millions of Europeans. You might also expect a body that takes crisis-solving decisions to be able to make them quickly and effectively. We also expect this, but sadly, the European Council does neither. All meetings are held behind closed doors and everything has to be decided by unanimity. Not transparent for obvious reasons and not efficient either. I mean, have you ever tried getting unanimity with 27 friends on something as simple as finding a place to eat? But it also makes it very easy for a single person to misuse their vote as leverage against the rest, getting concessions on topics through blackmail. So let's reform the European Council from a shadowy bottleneck to a transparent and effective body with public meetings and decisions made by majority instead of unanimity. While we're at it, let's change the name to the European Senate, because everyone is confused with all the councils we already have in Europe. Number 6. European President. Do you know who our common president is at the moment? Don't worry if you don't, because it's rather confusing. So confusing that even foreign heads of state and our own presidents seem to have trouble figuring it out. So, let's replace the current confusion and introduce a directly elected European president as our ceremonial head of state. Number 7. European watchdogs. To become an EU member state, countries need to meet conditions to ensure the stability of their democracy, rule of law and economy. But once you're in, you can let go of these conditions, and there seems very little the EU can do about this. Over the past years, some member states have been sliding back into a time when free press, independent judiciary and open democracy were unheard of. So what is the point of having requirements to join a club if after joining, power-hungry autocrats can just let their dictatorial self go In other words, the European Court of Justice must be given more powers to prevent democratic backsliding within the EU. And while we're at it, we should also give more power and resources to the European anti-fraud offices and the European Ombudsman to investigate suspicious dealings with tax money and stop corruption. That way, we can make sure that money doesn't end up in the pockets of a lucky few, but actually gets fully used to bolster our society. Number 8. European Public Broadcaster. Chances are that you can name dozens of newspapers, TV channels and radio stations in your own country. This is normal, since, just like with so many other things in Europe, the media are organized nationally, which is bad for a number of reasons. Most importantly, you get all your news with a strong national perspective, with the common European perspective missing. In other words, there is no common debate. The European perspective always gets a national interpretation, and as such, we have much less understanding of each other. For decades, media companies have exported entertainment formats throughout Europe and beyond. And they've done so successfully. So it's possible. Sadly, when it comes to news and journalism, this is not the norm at all. It's high time we change this by introducing an independent European broadcaster where all Europeans get information about the political situation in the EU in their own language. In addition, it's a good safeguard for when certain leaders with dictatorial tendencies start stripping free press in their country.
As you can see, major changes are needed to make the EU a true European parliamentary democracy. This requires cultural changes in how we view politics to shift it from national to European level, also in our minds. A common European broadcaster is another important step for this. And it requires fundamental changes to our treaties and institutions, such as the reform of the Commission to a European government and of the European Council to a European Senate. The introduction of an elected European President and the bolstering of our watchdogs. To make all these changes is not a small task, but it's worthwhile, because it'll enable us to effectively solve challenges like climate change and respond adequately to crises like pandemics or war. And as an added bonus, it'll enhance the well-being of all Europeans. Let us know what you think. Are these the reforms needed to fix the EU? If not, what model do you propose? Or are there other things you think are more urgent? Let us know in the comments.